I have done some serious damage to my bookshelf. I've read this many books this month, and I have a couple that I have recently picked up, so I have lots to say on these books and in this book report, so I'm just gonna get started. So essentially this book is about a child that goes missing in a really close-knit community in Britain. Essentially it goes like head on into the investigation of Glenn Taylor, who everyone assumes is the man that kidnapped and possibly murdered this child. But right from the beginning of the novel, we learn that Glenn Taylor has actually died. So that's why we are hearing this story from the side of his widow, which is a woman by the name of Jean Taylor. We're going back and forth between present and past tense in this novel, and it's mostly told to us through the opinion of Jean Taylor, but also through the main detective's perspective, a reporter's perspective, and sometimes Glenn's perspective. This book was really interesting, to be honest. I felt like in the beginning it was a bit slow, and then there's a few other suspects and just things that you kind of don't expect. But essentially this novel is about this really unreliable female narrator, which is Jean, because she was in this really emotionally abusive marriage with her husband who passed away. So it's very hard to trust what Jean is saying between the truth and what she is kind of stifling from the confines of her marriage with Glenn long after it is over. I almost felt like the end was a bit predictable, but if you do like novels like Girl on the Train, where the female narrator is pretty unreliable, so you don't know if you should believe her because you feel bad for the woman, but then you don't know if she's actually telling the truth. And in this one, in the end, I don't want to spoil anything, just yeah, it shows that you sometimes have no idea who your partner is in the end of the day, and this goes for both people in this novel. I do recommend this novel, but I think my opinion on a thriller is kind of biased just because of this other book that I have in this pile that has knocked every single book I've ever read out of the park. So I definitely recommend this one, so if you see it in Indigo, pick it up. I thought I would just mention this because I'm talking about unreliable female narrators and like thrillers. This is my favorite book by Gillian Flynn. I think I mentioned this in a previous video. This is Sharp Objects. But essentially this book is about a female journalist who has really struggled with things in her life. She has been in and out of a psychiatric hospital, and she has been put on this story that is actually occurring in her hometown, which she hasn't visited since she kind of was old enough to leave. Her mom is well off and she lives in this weird Victorian mansion. She's remarried and has a younger 13-year-old daughter who is the main narrator's now half-sister. So the female journalist goes to her hometown to investigate the murder of two teenaged girls that were just killed in a really graphic way. As she starts finding out things about the murder of these girls, she starts to learn more and more about her past and how weird her mom is and her younger sister. But then you also don't really know who to trust, because Camille, who is the main girl in this story, she drinks a lot and she is sometimes not all there. This book is so good, you guys. Honestly, it totally takes a turn. I had no inclination to where this book was gonna go and who was actually going to be the murderer in this case, and it's a really dark and graphic novel. You literally rip through it because you have to find out what's happening in the end. It's insane. Again, it's another book that's within the same category of not really trusting the female narrator, but also not really being able to trust who some of your family members are, because sometimes they're crazy. So this book is unreal. It's really hard to explain like what actually happens in it without ruining it, but you just have to trust me that this is a really good read. This book by Karen Slaughter, who is a crime novelist, and her last name is super fitting for the books that she writes. So this one by Karen Slaughter is called Coptown. It's set in Atlanta in 1974, so it's kind of talking about some of this, I guess, segregation that was still happening there during that time. It's a murder mystery thriller novel about the corruptness of the police force in Atlanta during this time, how they treated women that worked for them and people of color. There's this one main narrator named Kate, and she is not somebody that you would ever expect to be a cop. There is a lot of issues in this book about race and ethnicity and religion, because the main murderer in this novel is very like anti-Semitic, homophobic to an extreme, just an extremist essentially. And so Kate, this cop, she enters their workforce during a really tumultuous time in Atlanta where male cops and their partners continue to get murdered in the exact same way. Kate comes into the scene and everybody doubts her and has no hope for her ability as a cop pretty much, and she actually feels the same way about herself too. So it goes back and forth between Kate's perspective, the main girl, another female cop on her force named Maggie, and the murderer. So we learn right away actually that the murderer is stalking Kate really intensely. So Kate and Maggie, two female cops, kind of take this case head on, even though their supervisors are super against it because they're females and they don't believe in female cops there. This is actually a really good read. In the end, you are so shocked at who the murderer actually is. Karen Slaughter is a really good author. She just always sneaks in these little details that kind of deter you from thinking it's one person and then make you think it's another. You can't put her books down ever. She's one of my new favorite authors, and this is a really good book to read. I have to like prepare myself for this one. My friend recommended this to me, and initially I was kind of like, okay, it looks like one of those, no offense, mom book club books like Danielle Steele. I was kind of hesitant about this. I don't even know where to begin, you guys. This is the craziest book I have ever read, and that's why I feel like nothing can compete with this. So essentially this book is about two sisters, Claire and Lydia, who are still coming to terms with their youngest sister, Julia, her disappearance 2 decades earlier. So they're kind of still coming to grips with the loss of their sister and the loss of their father as well. Claire and Lydia, the two sisters that are still alive, they have a huge falling out and they haven't talked to each other since Julia's disappearance, essentially. And both of them have been living their separate lives. And then when something happens to Claire's husband, Lydia ends up coming back into Claire's life, and they start finding these things out about Claire's husband that are linking back to their youngest sister's disappearance. And they start putting 2 and 2 together, and then realizing that there's a lot more underneath the surface than they had expected. I have never read a book like this ever. I was one of those people that was like walking around downtown reading this book like this. I would stop in random places, and this was during the time of my final exam. I would literally stop in random places like a pizza shop, and I would sit down and start reading this book, and then the pizza shop would close and I was like, oh my god. So I would like be reading it on my way home. I could not put this book down. Honestly, you will go through this book so fast because it is gut-wrenching. But also I would like to say that if there is anybody young watching these videos, I would not recommend this book, okay? Stick to Harry Potter, great series. This is really not appropriate. I wouldn't let a kid read this, okay? It's very graphic. For me, a lot of the parts were a little too much. Like I almost felt sick over some of the parts, and it's like very violent, very sexual, violent stuff. So the other books are better. They're not this graphic. It's so good, you guys. I would read it again for sure. So highly recommend this if you are older, not young. Again, I totally recommend these books to you guys. The links to these books will be in my description bar. If you guys have any suggestions, I would love to hear them. And I think that's it. So thank you so much for watching, you guys. I'll see you next time.